Hi, my name's Aaron from the Michigan School of Apologetics, and here at this great university recently I was asked by a professor, point blank, eyeball to eyeball, he asked me, why is Christianity true?
I love the fact that you played up this whole point blank and eyeball to eyeball like it was some dramatic question to be asked. This isn't Pokemon, we don't battle in public. But you were at a university, and the question as to why you believe in Christianity seems like a pretty smart place to start. No drama involved. Not every question has to be warped to match the narrative of God's not dead or faith matters, you know. People can just be curious as to why you believe in Christianity.
Now, if you were asked that question, why is Christianity true, what would you say? I just want to share with you my 3 points that I told him. The 3 points are, I think there's good evidence for God, I think there's good evidence for the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and I think there's good evidence of personal experience like answered prayer why God exists and why Christianity is true.
Okay, well, I naturally take issue with all 3 claims you have made here from my past experience with all 3 topics. Yet since you mentioned evidence, I am intrigued to see what you have. Hopefully it's not simply some vague assertion waving. Let's see if you can do what so many others have failed.
So the first one is, I think there's good evidence for God. You know, over the last 50 years, has science confirmed the Bible and Christianity, or has it shown it to be silly and fairy tales? Well, one of the biggest mysteries of the universe is, how did everything get here? And 50 years ago, people were kind of dabbling with, well, maybe there's a beginning to the universe, maybe we don't know. But the prevailing view 40, 50 years ago was that that the universe was always here, that the universe was eternal. And now it's totally flip-flopped 100%, that people believe and scientists believe that there was a beginning to the universe. People call it the Big Bang. Now, obviously, if there was a Big Bang, there had to be someone to bang it. You know, you can't get something from nothing. And so does that confirm the Bible and Christianity or not confirm it? Well, obviously, the very first verse of the Bible is, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So we have a beginning, which confirms science, and we have someone there to kickstart the whole thing. That totally affirms science.
No. That's called retrofitting and is a poor example of it. Sure, our observable universe had a beginning. Before that, whether it be multiverse or a quantum state or some as of yet unthought of theory, is currently being investigated by science. However, so far we only observe evidence for the natural. No supernatural elements being present, making your assumption of a universe creating God completely unfounded. But not only is it unfounded, how you laid out things are internally inconsistent. You assert something cannot come from nothing and yet fail to apply this logic to your deity. All you can do to save yourself from this is resort to defining God as uncaused, a step I can take equally with the universe in its original state prior to the expansion from a state of singularity, aka the Big Bang. If you refuse to acknowledge this, then you are simply resorting to a special pleading fallacy, where you assert your hypothesis be given special privilege over the various other scientific theories that have testable merit. That falls flat for so many reasons. Fact is, all evidence points towards a natural origin to the universe, meaning your additive of God will always be more assumption heavy than me simply putting forward a self-forming mechanism to the universe. Say hello to Occam's razor. But moving on from your retrofitting of cosmology onto the field of astronomy, we can find numerous testable claims in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 1 verses 6 through 8, we have the formation of what is known as the firmament, described in the New International Version as a vault of the sky. This is reference to the belief that the sky was a solid dome, separating the waters of the earth from the waters of the sky, which, if you know anything about modern astronomy and meteorology, is just laughable. And yet the Bible is not done with the absurdities. In the same chapter from verses 14 through 19, it talks about the formation of both the sun and the moon, light sources in their own right according to the Bible, which track across the before-mentioned firmament. So not only is the sun circling the earth according to the Bible, but it is doing so across a solid dome. On top of that, it declares the moon to be a light source as opposed to the reflective surface we know it to be. And that's only a minor fraction of what the first chapter of the Bible gets wrong about the world we live in. The Bible is not supported by science, rather the opposite. Anytime the Bible makes a testable claim about things the people back then should not have known of, whilst an all-knowing God should have, science finds it to be false. It's almost as if said book was based on the ignorance of people, not the wisdom of God.
And also, with biology, has biology shown that the complexity of life is more complex than we thought or less complex? Well, we know it's more complex. We know that there's information in our cells, there's codes. And last time I checked, people have to go to this great university to do computer software, to write programs and write codes. And anybody will tell you that DNA is one of the most complex written codes that there is. So obviously if it takes a mind, a person, an intelligent person to write software and programs, then in our cells there is software, there is programs written, and it takes a mind to write programs.
The fallacious equation of genetic material to digital code fails to impress. This is called an argument by analogy, an argument where a teaching tool given to students at the introductory level has been taken and abused to depict the exact nature of what is being analogized. The two are not comparable. Digital information is archived away, retrieved, and then translated into text, video, and audio, etc. in different stages. We just don't notice these stages due to the speed of modern computers. Meanwhile, there is nothing in the cell comparable to digital code. Instead, it has a mechanical function at the chemical level. Everything happens simultaneously due to the nature of DNA being a tangible thing and not an abstract. DNA can also mutate through various means and yet still function. Yet if you were to try the same on a digital file, said file would corrupt. Also, the DNA is not a code of the body. Yes, it is the base, but above that we have the hormones. There is no such distinction in digital code. It's all zeros and ones top to bottom. Meanwhile, the human body is not entirely comprised of DNA. The DNA is a small part of the body located inside the nucleus of the cell. So the analogy does not work at any sort of level. But moving on, how are you quantifying complexity? You assert that DNA is far more complicated than digital code, which can communicate with others on different continents, launch humankind into space, and potentially turn the face of the Earth into a nuclear wasteland at the press of a few buttons. But you don't actually supply evidence for that claim. It seems to me that complicated just means currently out of humankind's ability, which is a shrinking pool of inability, I must say. It's almost like God of the gaps, but God of the human incapability. But the fact is, we can do it. We have always been able to do it, and that's the entire reason we are alive today. It's called procreation. When asserting that it is currently out of humankind's ability, what you really mean is that we haven't found an overly complicated way to do what we have always naturally had the ability to do. So yeah, not so complex when you put it that way. But even if you could quantify complexity, how would this in any way demonstrate the existence of a deity? Just because something is true in one instance does not make it true in another.
So I think there's good evidence for God, number one. Number two, I think there's evidence for the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Well, many years ago in the late 70s, there was a man by the name of Gary Habermas, and he came to this university here at Michigan State University, and he said, I'd like to prove the resurrection of Jesus really happened. And they said, okay, we'll let you do your PhD work on that, but you can't use the Bible. So he said, okay. So he went around to all the English sources he could find, German and French, such as history, archaeology, Bible theologians, historians, and he collected all the data, and what he found was that in all these sources there was a prevailing view on different data, like Jesus lived, Jesus was crucified by the Roman government, he was buried in a borrowed tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, he was buried, and then 3 days later the tomb was found empty, and that the disciples believed that they saw the resurrected Christ after Jesus had rose from the dead. Now that doesn't prove that Jesus rose from the dead, but what's the best evidence that fits all those facts? So Gary Habermas called it the minimal facts argument, that Jesus lived, died, tomb is empty, disciples saw the risen Jesus, they touched him. And so what if all that evidence is there that historians, archaeologists, theologians confirm for the majority of people, what evidence fits that data the best? Well, obviously that there was a person who lived, died, and rose from again, and that it's true. So here at MSU, they awarded Gary Habermas with a PhD in the minimal facts argument for the resurrection.
Gary Habermas's work is incredibly lacking on so many fronts that it's a poor choice to go to. For a start, he openly admits that the majority of the evidence he utilizes is an unpublished 600 pages of manuscript he's gathered personally. So first off the bat, we don't have access to his sample to check if what he is saying is true, simply his word. Secondly, there are grounds for massive selection bias. Habermas went out to find a sample that agreed with him in who he approached. He didn't take a poll and get a representative sample, he targeted people in a way to try and get the sample he wanted. Since he never actually published his sample, we don't know how many of these people who believe that Christ was divine were Christian. I'm betting the majority, if not all. That's why it's important to lay out the methodology, which Habermas never did. But in the end, all of this is pretty irrelevant to the fact that it has no weight on the life and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The fact that we have no primary sources for either of these things outside of the Bible is pretty damning. All we in fact have are secondary sources that mention Christians, but not a single mention or detail about Christ. Only post-Christianization do we suddenly get all of the writings about Christ based on the Bible. Now we know that Christendom existed with the Catholic and Orthodox churches. We know they had vast amounts of control and destroyed writings they could not edit to match their narrative. That religious canopy which tortured the non-believer and maintained a monopoly on writing explains all of these secondary sources without the need to invoke mythical events which contradict the very fabric of reality. That is the less assumption-based position than what you are proposing, as it's based in what we know to be, not what could have been. Occam's razor strikes again.
And last, to this professor, I said, I think that there's good evidence such as answered prayer, and I said, can I tell you one? And he said, sure. So real quick, and you probably have your own answered prayer if you're watching this. My answered prayer recently was that I had a car repair, and the repair was going to be more than what my car is worth. So I prayed, went down to a shop that I'd never been to before. The guy gave me a price of $450. I was shocked because the repair was supposed to be around $1,500. So that was answered prayer number one. But still, $450 out of the blue, it kind of hurt. So I prayed. The next morning I got up. I got a call from a friend that I kind of knew sort of well, never met his wife before. He said, Eric, can I meet you for lunch? I said, sure. So we're talking, and out of his pocket, he pulls out a check for $500 written to me. He says, Aaron, this is for you. He said, my wife and I were praying for you, and we feel that you might need this. And he said, who knows? And he slid it to me. He said, who knows? You might have, say, a car repair of like $475 or something. I was in awe. He didn't even know about my need, didn't know about the price, didn't know about my car, and within 24 hours that was provided for. So I told that professor that, and he said, that's a good one. And it is a good one. Meaning that there's a God who's alive and listens to our prayers.
But hang on. Why, if you barely knew each other and they had no idea about your crash, did they suddenly decide to pray for you? It wasn't, we were praying to God and God told us, but they set out to pray for you, and then they came to you. Seems to me like you're changing the story slightly with each retelling. At first it was just a tale of kindness which doesn't prove God, so you've slowly edited parts either consciously or subconsciously. Also, why didn't God just help you the first time? Isn't he all-knowing? Didn't he know that you wouldn't be able to afford the price of the repairs either way? You make him sound like a teenager who won't take out the bin, so you have to keep on prodding them to do so. As for the cost of the car, how did you know it would be $1,500 before you went to them? You, a non-mechanic, were wrong, so there's no miracle there. Also, why did the couple give you $500? Why not the $400 you needed? Did your god flunk math in divine school? To me it sounds like they heard about you and your crash and decided to give you what they could, not knowing the cost of the repair since they'd only heard small details from either friends or Facebook, and you pocketed the other $100. In short, your unverifiable anecdote with countless holes fails to impress at all.
So those three things, why I believe Christianity is true. I think there's good evidence for God. I think there's good evidence for the life, death, and resurrection. And I think there's good evidence for our subjective experiences like answered prayer. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.
My question is the following. What evidence do you have that Christianity is true? Because currently you've argued from your own personal ignorance and incredulity in science. That's not evidence. You've mentioned a poorly made and completely irrelevant study which reached unfounded conclusions. That's not evidence. And last of all, you've given an unverifiable anecdote with more holes than a fishnet, which again is not evidence, period. So that's 3 for 3 strikes and you're out. The fact that you believe yourself to be capable of teaching other people on how to respond to questions about the validity of their position is laughable. There is nothing in this video that will actually convince a skeptic. So not only do I withhold belief on your end anecdote, I also doubt you talked to a professor, or if you did, that they were somehow magically convinced by what you said. There is nothing convincing to be had here, I can assure you. There are a few things which I'd just like to add here at the end of this video. The first is a massive thank you to everyone who has ever donated to me via Patreon. Your fantastic support has given me the ability to keep this channel going, and I hope to continue producing content in the years to come. Secondly, I would like to thank anyone who has ever interacted with this channel. Your shares, likes and dislikes, as well as your comments of both approval and disapproval, have ensured constant feedback allowing me to improve my work. Last of all, I would like to express my desire that you treat any of the people displayed throughout the video with respect. Whilst it is true that ideas do not demand respect, and there are many in fact which deserve reprehension, we must be careful on how we tackle said ideas in ensuring we are not simply targeting the person. In short, be the compassionate side of reason. So take care, and I'll see you next time.